What's good? We are rolling live. Wrestling with the Future is live with Gary Michael Cappetta. Hello, everybody. Angelo DeCipio. Welcome to our year-end push. I told you, I promised you, save the best for last. I wasn't lying. My guys are with me. I've got, of course, the happy haberdasher, the smartest man in the room. New hat every week. And by the way, Daniel, that's a fine-looking hat. I haven't seen that one before.
You're rolling out for a special occasion.
And our man from deep in the Sunshine State, Big Ben Scala, hashtag Scala from Ocala, by way of Newport Richie. How are you, Professor? You're looking more and more like Professor Irwin Corey, by the way.
Irwin Corey. God rest his soul. I'm just happy to be here and happy and honored to interview such a great guest. Amazing guest. And I want to tell everybody, if you live under a rock and you don't know who this man is, well, by God, I'm going to tell you right now. Gary Michael Cappetta is a professional wrestling ring announcer, author, voiceover artist, screenwriter, stage performer, and teacher. And after having spent more than 20 years in the middle of the pro wrestling ring, he finally penned and self-published his personal memoirs, Bodyslams, Memoirs of a Wrestling Pitchman, a book I highly recommend for its no kayfabe spin zone. Ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome one of the innovators, the trailblazer, Gary Michael Cappetta. How are you, brother?
Hey, I'm doing well. That was actually 20 years ago that that book came out. I've been crawling underneath and over rings for 45 years now. And I didn't realize it until I did the AEW show, AEW Dynamite, back in February.
Yeah.
And that's what they had under, and they did pretty good research because I started in 74, so they were right on.
Well, I'll tell you what, my friend, that book kind of ties into our anniversary. I say our anniversary. It was 19 years ago yesterday that you worked for me in Atlantic City, New Jersey at the Sands Casino.
Wow.
And your appearance tonight was nothing short of serendipitous. It was, it hit me. I'm going to tell you how it hit me. Like all great moments hit me in the shower. I was taking a shower today in, preparation for this, getting myself together for my show. And it dawned on me, today's the 17th. Yesterday's the 16th. Imagine that. 19 years ago yesterday, Gary Michael Cappetta stepped into the middle of my ring and announced Jimmy Snuka and Tom Brandi as the Patriot, taking on Big Slam Vader, rest his soul, Walt McDonald, and a newcomer named Breaker Morant. Remember that?
So what year are we talking about?
2001.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, 2001, and I have the tape. And I've got about 4,000 DVD copies. Yes, a very energetic Gary Michael Cappetta, just doing what he does best, getting people excited. And so let's talk about that. People don't understand, Gary, and I'm gonna hit you right out of the box with this. People don't understand that the ring announcer, like every other moving part of a wrestling show, the ring announcer is the focal point. That man holding that mic can make or break your show. You were charged with the duty, the task, the awesome task of having to keep people's interest for a 2.5 or 3 hour show by yourself. A referee is interchangeable. Wrestlers are interchangeable. It doesn't happen with ring announcers. When you're the announcer for the whole show. So let's talk about the awesome task of having to carry basically an entire evening on your shoulders.
Thank you for that question. Thank you for that question. It's, but it's not people's fault that they don't understand, because let's face it, most people, they don't actually ever get out to see a wrestling show. So what they know is what they see on television. And for instance, when I did pay-per-views, I did the live special Clash of Champions, or even the taped syndicated shows. My work starts when I step in the ring before the cameras come on, because it's not just happenstance that when the cameras zoom across the audience that everybody's wild and crazy. There are ways that I concocted over the years to interact with the fans in order to get them crazy. And it's not that they weren't excited about the wrestling of the wrestlers. It's just I had to focus them on the fact that they were going to be on television. And that was
exactly,
that was the huge thing. And the crazier and the noisier that they were, the more likely it was that our cameras were going to pick them up. So, the work started before anyone ever, at home would ever see what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Gary, I'm going to tell you something, and consider it a compliment. Your announcing style, if there is such a thing, is very reminiscent to me, as I'm of a certain age bracket, very reminiscent to me of a guy named Charles Buddy Wagner, a guy who I had the chance to know a little bit over the years because of who my uncle was. And in fact, you knew my uncle, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Buddy Wagner, and you mentioned getting the people into it even before the show starts. Buddy would often stand out front and sell programs or take ticket money or do any number of things to be out there with the people. So when they saw him in the ring, there was that instant connection that, oh, that's the guy we saw out there. So, and it created that symbiotic relationship. You did that with your youth, with your vitality, with your natural enthusiasm, and you just come across like a really nice guy. I can absolutely vouch that you are a nice guy because I know who you are, and I worked with you. And you were a nice guy. So let's talk about who your inspirations were. I will tell you, consider it a compliment that I'm comparing you to Buddy Wagner. But who was the guy for you? Who was the guy that you kind of like put your head around?
I have an answer for that. Before we go on, let's pause a second.
Sure.
And if you wanted to go into it in more detail, the first question that you asked me, there were many more aspects to that answer, because there were times that a ring announcer had to switch gears and tell people that the main event wasn't going to be there that night. And how you do that and how you handle that is important. There were times when a ring announcer has to tell the folks that the disputed ending of the match was not going to be to their liking. And there's a way that you need to do that. And then there are your ordinary announcements. And then even like with your uncle at the Spectrum, the card for the next month, that was an important announcement. So there are other things that come under the, when you're being educated to be an announcer, usually by being in the middle of a situation, you learn on your feet. Yeah. But there are things.
Take a few minutes and smarten up Benny and Dan, and let's grab one or two of those subject matters. Feel free to, please.
One video that's gone viral and has been viral for years was the night in the Meadowlands that I told the folks that not only was Ric Flair not going to be at the arena that night, he was in the main event, Not only was he not the world's champion anymore, but he wasn't even with the promotion anymore.
Oh,
and that's who the folks came to see, and that's who they paid for.
Yes.
Oh
my God, I remember that. Yeah.
That would be an example of where you're giving people bad news. And
I almost forgot about that.
Important thing with giving people bad news is not to make it seem like it's anything but bad news. I agree with you. I'm pissed too. I wanted to see that match. I'm really pissed that Flair's not with WCW anymore. So you make the announcement and then you let it sink in. You pause for a second. You don't run ahead and say, you're going to see something better. I'm not going to convince you that what you're going to see is better than what you expected to see. But I'm going to try. But just in the tenor of my voice and the look on my face and my body language, I'm communicating to you, I think this sucks too.
Absolutely.
So that therefore I'm not creating an adversarial relationship with the folks. I'm on their side.
Yeah, and that's what I pointed to in referencing Buddy Wagner. It was that symbiotic, announcer-fan connection. Dan the Man, I know you are wiggling in your seat over there, chomping at the bit to ask Gary Michael Cappetta any number of questions, so fire away, young man.
Well, it's actually funny, the story you just told, Gary, because before we got you on, I was speaking with Benny, and I mentioned that clip that you had spoken about. And that was when Angelo told me you were going to be on the show. That was the first thing that popped in my mind, because you announcing that Flair had been stripped of the title, I think that was either 81, 82. I must have seen that 1,000 times because of how many times it showed up in montages of the old territory tapes that I could rent from the video store. I can't think of any clip of your work that I think has popped up more in memory than that announcement, and I think that's hilarious. But and I was hoping actually for you to expand on what you just said about the good news, bad news. Is there, when you have to go out and make that kind of announcement, is it a big crew of people that have to look, here's what you got to say? I mean, obviously you didn't have writers back then, but is that kind of somebody tells you, hey, Flair's not showing up tonight, go, or does somebody give you kind of an outline of what you're saying?
It depends. It depends on who I'm dealing with. Actually, that was in the 90s. It was WCW, early WCW. But sometimes I would have a public relations person. It depends on what kind of an announcement it was. And they would have this beautifully written paragraph that they expected me to go out and read. And I would have to politely say to them, I don't do that. This voice is a public relations person's voice. I'm going to communicate everything that you want communicated, but it's going to be in Gary Michael Cappetta's ring announce voice or Gary Michael Cappetta's style. And, no one ever said, no, you're going to read that. I did what could they do when I'm out there anyway? So I communicated the best way. And when I was working in Baltimore every month for Jim Crockett's NWA, we had a policy where, when I would go to the ring, in the event that a top match was not going to appear, I'm not sure whether it was a Crockett policy or whether it was a Maryland State Athletic Commission policy, but we had to, and I think it's the right thing to do, we had to offer refunds. And the way that worked was I would go out, I would tell them the bad news. As I described before, yes, everything about me said I agree with you. And you have until the end of the first match to go to the box office and get your refund and obviously leave. Well, the chances of that happening, not that great, because they made all these plans, the babysitter's hired. But nevertheless, what I would do at intermission is I would check with the promoter, Gary Jester, and this didn't happen often. I would say to him, Gary, how many refunds did we have? And it was just a way for me maybe to gauge the success of that announcement. And, the lower the number, the better I did.
Absolutely.
I mean, how else would I know?
Absolutely.
How else would I know how effective I was?
Big Ben Scala, you've got one of the best in the business.
Absolutely. Well, Gary, first of all, happy belated birthday. I think it was Saturday, right?
Thank you very much. Yes, it was.
29 again, right?
I was on the road all day. I drove 14 hours that day.
Wow.
My screen just went away. I don't know whether that's affecting anything that you guys are doing.
Not at all. We can hear you clear as day.
Okay.
Yep, so, we're all good here.
I'm going to have a flashback and go back to my youth in around 1975. And Angelo can remember this, and I'm sure a lot of people who are listening are going to say the same thing. When I heard, greetings wrestling fans and welcome to another action-packed card of All-Star Wrestling. And when you said that, and then, then you started giving, the promoters, Phil Zacco, the timekeeper is Mike Mittman. I was absolutely hooked. And, I mean, there could have been a mushroom cloud at my window, and I wasn't going anywhere. And I guess my point in all of it is, to me, you really established, I call it an air of legitimacy. Exactly. That, you're announcing athletic commissioners and physicians and, referees. And it just made it so believable. Is that something that you went for?
No, that was something that I believe by athletic commission rules that was supposed to be done. You know where I thought you were going to go with that? Was at the end when the people would boo me. And I'm hearing that, so Gary,
exactly.
Boo!
Well, that's funny because there was another guy here in the Philadelphia area, and I know, Gary, that you know who I'm talking about. The late Ed Darien.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, Ed. I knew Ed. Ed was a great guy. He was largely a boxing announcer, but very much in that style, that old carny style of wrestling announcers. He had this kind of swagger in his voice, but he's a guy who almost daily got booed, either because of how he said it or what he said, or the fact that his tuxedo looked like it had been slept in the night before. And he was a really great guy. I loved that Darien. He was a great guy. But he just had this people wanted to beat him up kind of feel about him, Gary. You, on the other hand, people wanted to take you home for dinner.
Yeah.
And introduce you, to their daughter.
Yep. Yes. They liked me. That's why they booed me. They were teasing me. People today don't understand that. The feeling, it was a camaraderie at a wrestling show. Yeah. Things weren't so, even though I kept separated and there were certain things that I would say and not say, I understood that my work began when I pulled into the parking lot and I left my car, and my work ended when I entered the car and pulled out of that parking lot at the end of the night. Because whenever a fan would approach me, I was working. It didn't matter whether I was in the ring, whether I was wearing a tuxedo, didn't matter. But that being said, even though I was mostly able to keep a distance, people didn't know that it was a calculated camaraderie, to tell you the truth. That I knew there were certain things I wasn't going to be chatting about with them, and I knew that I represented the promoter, and I knew I represented WWF, and no one needed to explain that to me. So what I said was as if they had sent a press release out. So I was very careful with what I said to fans.
Gary, is an announcer at any time ever considered, quote, one of the boys, unquote?
While I was doing those shows, I would have said no. But years later, as I've met up with a lot of the legends at conventions, I come to find that they did consider me one of the boys. I just, I never went out partying. All of those years that we're talking about, up until '89, I was teaching school. So I would do my wrestling show and go right home. So I never socialized with anyone.
Yeah.
But the wrestlers that understood the entire idea of wrestling and that understood that it was a team effort, they considered me one of the boys. I would say that a wrestler who thought that he was the beginning and the end of the world, and he didn't need a good referee, he didn't need a good introduction, he didn't need good TV, that if he showed up anywhere, Broughton Market at 11 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, that he'd draw 19,000 people. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
he wouldn't consider me to be a member of the team because he only saw himself.
Wondered that because I've often wondered that because of the in some cases the perceived adversarial relation between the announcer and the so-called heel or so-called baby face in the match. The baby's going to come out, everybody's going to cheer him. The heel's going to come out, everybody's going to boo him. He's going to give you a bunch of crap. He's going to give everybody at ringside a bunch of crap, including Dick Graham and Gorilla Monsoon at ringside at the Spectrum. By the way, Dick Graham was my mentor and my broadcast teacher, as was a dear friend of mine who got me my first gig as a recording engineer, Cal Rudman. Very dear friends back in the day. Our friend Nikita Brezhnikov wanted me to kind of throw that into you. See if you remembered Cal and Dick Graham.
Sure, Cal was in the music business.
Yeah.
Was it the Monday morning quarterback or something like that?
Yeah, Monday morning quarterback. Absolutely.
It came out every Monday, every week.
It sure did.
It was an industry standard. He was what he said in that publication affected a lot of what went on in the music business.
He was the golden ear. He was the definitive word on music. And I can tell you, having worked for Cal Rudman, considered Cal a mentor and a friend. I've only done two things in my whole life, Gary, and I'm 62 years old. I've only done wrestling and the music business, and I've said it on the show many, many times. It's all I've ever done. And I interrupted Benny Scala's question section. I hardly ever do that, Benny. I'm sorry. You'll have to. Dan, what are you laughing at?
Oh, it's just nice to see you interrupt somebody else for a change.
I want to take care of you, young man. Benny, go ahead, brother.
Well, the other question I had too, I didn't know until today that you were a teacher, and I value education very highly, and I wanted maybe you to talk about your teaching career and how you juggle that with your wrestling announcing.
Right. When Gorilla Monsoon first called and asked me to work all of his shows in the New Jersey area, I said to him, I can't, because I just, I was 21 years old. I had just graduated from, at the time it was Monmouth College, and I had just gotten my first teaching job. So he said, well, you can teach in the day and announce at night. He said, that's not going to be a problem. And I did. So my students would see me every Saturday night or every Saturday morning, depending on the market, that they saw I taught Spanish. They saw their Spanish teacher do crazy things on TV. But they, if they talked about it, they talked about it at a distance. There weren't many, I didn't talk very often about what I did in the ring with students. If they tried to sway me away from a topic by asking something, or I would just tell them we could talk about it, but after class, and that was not a problem. But most of the times I think they were intimidated by that whole thing, and it didn't come up very often. But I do consider that education and ring announcing to be the same in the sense that they're two different forms of communication and of educating at times. So you just have to know who your audience is. Done very differently, of course, different, obviously circumstances, but there are similarities between the two.
Go ahead, Benny. Go ahead, Benny.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I give you one more question. Good.
Well, yeah, one more question. I feel like Columbo. Just one more thing, man. I almost forgot. So I know you probably said this 1,000 times, but I love hearing it. How you got into the wrestling business almost by accident.
Yeah, I was in Wildwood. They didn't have an announcer, and Willie Gilzenberg, who was seen as the president of the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, was very, well, to me at least, at 21. He was a very old guy. I think he had suffered a stroke in earlier years, so he had difficulty in walking. And he would be in the box office during a match. And when the match was over, he would hear the bell, and he would slowly make his way to the ring. I don't think he ever got in the ring. And he picked up the microphone and he announced who the winner was. And then I think he waited at the mat and then announced the introductions for the next match. And I'm a fan, and I'm sitting there, and I'm saying, this is going to take for fucking ever. Ever. So I said, I can do this. And my friend who was with me, she said, yeah, you can do this. So I went up to him and I just said to him, if you want, I'll be happy to make the introductions for you. And he took it as, so he didn't have to go back and forth. I took it as, I want to get this show on the road. And I sat there, and at the end of the night, he asked me if I had any experience. I lied to him. I said yes. He said, come back next week with dressed in a tie, and we'll put you in the ring. And there was a weekly wrestling event in Wildwood during the summer. And the first show that I introduced there was 4th of July weekend of 1974.
Yep.
It was Sammartino versus Volkov in the main event. And the very first match that night was Pretty Boy Larry Sharp's very first match in the ring. So his career and my career started at the same second.
Wow.
Absolutely. And Larry was a dear friend of mine, and he was my trainer, and he was my teacher. And I mentioned my uncle, and I haven't told you yet who my uncle is, but his name's been mentioned twice. His name was Phil Zacco.
Yep.
And I'm sure you already knew that.
Well, you had told me that in a message.
Yes, I absolutely did. I sure
did. You were very upset with me when you sent that message. It had to do, I think, with maybe Sherry Martel.
It actually did, and in fact, I've since been smartened up on that particular incident by Sherry's best friend, who happens to be my next door neighbor, Kathy Fitzpatrick, who I know you know.
I saw Kathy I saw her a couple of weeks ago at a wrestling event.
Yeah, absolutely. She lives literally right across the street.
Okay.
And she's been on the show quite a few times already. In fact, she just did a show with the who was on that night, Dan? Kevin Sullivan.
Yep.
Yeah, Kevin Sullivan was. Dan, go ahead. I'm going to throw it back up to you, and then I'll.
Let's look at that question for a second, though. Sure. I'm going to cause a little bit of ripple. Is that okay? I don't mean the wine. I mean,
absolutely. I'll never shy away from controversy.
Okay, good. I was promoting my upcoming Beyond Bodyslam stage show.
Yes.
And I must have used a picture of me and Sherry in doing so. And you contacted me we didn't know I guess we did. I didn't know that we knew each other. And you contacted me via Messenger, and you said that if you support this woman, or I will never come to your show. And it was almost like I'm saying to myself, where's this guy coming from? It's like if I constructed my show to please the sensibilities of everyone, I'd have nobody.
I know.
Very true.
Well, I'm thinking to myself, like, this is kind of like out of place. Like, but I did answer you, and I gave you the best answer I could give you.
I'm actually going to replace a word you used. It wasn't out of place. It was misplaced. And I'm going to tell you what happened. What I did that I should not have done, and I should have known better. What I did was I assumed, and the essence of assume is that you make an ass of you and me. I assumed that the information I was given about Sherry was correct as of that time. I was given information that she had nefariously worked her way up the ranks in wrestling on her back. That turned out not to be true. She actually worked her way up the ladder the old-fashioned way she worked. And I was out of place in assuming that she was just handed a free ride because of what she was able to do for somebody or what they could do for her. And I assumed that, here's this person, taking the glory for something she didn't work for. That's what my offense was, that the perception that she did not work for what she had.
Yeah, but Angelo, if I only approach subjects at my show that were not offensive to anyone, who would want to come to my show? I mean,
absolutely. Now, if you present offensive material, I'll probably bring a group of people with me.
I mean, I keep my language very clean at my shows, but I'm very honest, and I don't do anything, as in my book, to purposely bury anyone. I thought your objection was drug related. That was my. No.
And that's a whole separate issue aside. Whatever a person's demons are, is between them and their demon. That wasn't my issue because I'm no choir boy, Gary. I'll be honest with you. And people who watch this show know it. I just for the first time just started smoking. I stopped smoking 7 months ago. I smoked from the time I was 16 years old. I'm 62, and I stopped like 7 months ago. So, again, and a lot of things in between those years, I'm no choir boy by any stretch. I guess, when hypocrisy in the form of a mirror is shoved in your face, you have one of two choices. You either face it and look at it, or you turn your back and walk away. And I did not turn my back and walk away, and I'm facing it now.
Let me, I hope this doesn't ruin our Skype connection, but I'd like to try to go back.
Sure.
Am I still with you?
Yes, you are absolutely clear and clean.
Oh, okay. I want to read, and this is on the same conversation that we've been having. So I didn't go dig for this at all.
Right.
This was my answer to you because you told me, well, if you want me to read, I can read what you said, but
yeah, in full disclosure, go for it. Absolutely.
The Skype window is covering what you said. I really do want to see your show. It's being heralded as a must-see, but my spirit is conflicted by that picture. Sway me, please, Angelo. By the way, first shoot, I'm Phil Zacco's nephew. So my response to you was, no, Angelo, I will not try to sway you. Exactly. While the show is in large part fun, informative, and sentimental, there will be tough topics addressed. I don't dwell on negativity and balance it with all of the wonderful, uplifting people I've befriended. I truly hope between now and for as long as tickets are available, as if I was going to sell out. And for as long as tickets, that's the promoter in me. And for as long as tickets are available, you become less conflicted. But I would not recommend that you enter the show experience with negative vibes. I strive for all of my audience to enter the theater in anticipatory mood and to leave being uplifted. I hope you can. And then I was happy with my answer, to tell you the truth. Ordinarily, I would have ignored your question or your message, but there was such passion behind it. And for you to have gone out of your way to send me a message about that, I thought it did deserve a response.
And I appreciate that. And there was a time, and Dan, the man, can tell you, he's been with me for quite a little bit of time now. There was a period of time where I relied very, very heavily on my spirit, and realized that your spirit can sway you one way or another to do the right or wrong thing, and it's not always the right or wrong thing. Sometimes it's what's convenient for you, subconsciously. So at the time, I was full of piss and vinegar and this grand delusion that I was somehow, above reproach, and I'm not. Certainly not at all. And I appreciate very much, and I'll tell you straight up, I appreciate very much being put in my place. And thank you for that.
Here's the important part. Did you come to the show?
Well, yeah, I did.
Oh, good. All right.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
The one in Philly.
That was the very first one.
Yeah. I was there. Good, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I still have my ticket stubs. Good, Dan.
Are we sure this time?
Yeah, that's your name, Dan.
No, I want to make sure I actually get to say something.
I'm gonna smack him.
Gary, I wanted to. I'm curious. I was hoping you could fill in the story. You've had the nickname the most dangerous announcer. Yes. Jim Cornette tagged you with that. I was wondering if you could share the story of how that came about.
Love it.
Honestly, I don't know it. I don't think there is a story. It was. I know why it was. Why I was tagged with it. Cornette was on commentary, probably with Jim Ross, during probably one of the syndicated shows. But the world's most dangerous announcer has its origins from Dick the Bruiser, the world's most dangerous wrestler. And in between, David Letterman grew up in Indianapolis. He was a wrestling fan. Yep. He liked Dick the Bruiser. When he started his TV show, he dubbed his band announcer, his band leader, the world's most dangerous band.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that's all that I know, to tell you the truth.
And that's about the gist of it, Gary, honestly.
There's not much more to it.
Yeah.
And I think that Corny thought that it was funny because the way I'm presented in the ring, and for the most part in real life, I'm the farthest thing from being dangerous. So that made it funny, sort of like an inside ha-ha joke.
Exactly.
Well, let me circle back to something we talked about in the beginning. We've joked a lot on this show about having to call it in the ring and change things up. I'm curious if you have any stories where you've had to go out. You were telling about having to make these announcements. The champion's not here. This match isn't going to happen. If you have any stories where you've had to go out and make that announcement, and the show that was slapped together at the last second turned out to be a better card than what you were disappointed you had to tell the fans wasn't happening.
You know what? I don't think I have that perspective, to tell you the truth. On those nights, which I have to say were rare, 99% of the time, we delivered what was publicized. Those were nights where you're just trying to get through the night. So I don't really think that I was able to sit back and assess the evening and compare it to what would have been. I honestly didn't put much thought into it.
Gary, when you were with WWF, Worldwide Wrestling Federation, and you were there first, and you saw the evolution of the World Wrestling Federation and World Wrestling Entertainment, of course. Explain to me. I mean, I don't know if it's a corporate thing, whether it's an individual thing, but explain to me the difference in mindset between the WWF Northeast-based promotion and the more Southern-based WCW promotion. What's the singular difference if you had to nutshell it into a one or two thing answer? What's the difference philosophically between the North and the South in that wrestling technique or style or philosophy?
Are you talking about in ring, or are you talking about my relationship with the promotions?
As a management and or corporate entity, the difference in the front office people.
Well, that's difficult in the sense that I had absolutely, other than with Gorilla Monsoon, I had absolutely no relationship with management in WWF. They didn't want me to have a relationship with them. I had the hubris of asking for a raise. Ooh, as a ring announcer, as the lowest guy in the totem pole of the performers. One night in Hamburg, I tried to approach Vinny, and he said, "Talk to my father. I don't do that." And I actually went in, and Monsoon was there. Your uncle was there, I believe, and it was after I had an illness, and I was on my back for like 5-6 months. And I would just lay there and I'd say, what would I be doing with all this time? Mm-hmm. And I realized how much time I was putting in announcing. And so I went in and I asked for a raise. And maybe I was making $40. I asked for 60, or I was, making 60. I asked for 70. This was for 3 hours of TV wrestling.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I know.
And I was ready. And I was talking to McMahon Sr., and I was ready for whatever he said to me. I had a comeback, except for the one thing he did say to me. And he said very simply, "I can't afford it."
Isn't that remarkable? Well,
what do you say to that? You know that it's not true. And like,
I'll tell you something, brother. In full disclosure, I know that story. I worded my question in such a way that it would elicit that answer. And I will tell you, the single biggest mistake that company made was letting you go away. That was the single biggest mistake they made, and I mean that. And I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. I'm telling you straight shoot. Think about this, and I know what it's like because I did some ring announcing. $20, $25 was the pinnacle of my 2.5, 3 hour night. $25. It cost me more to get to some of these places than I made, and that's the truth. But when you're making $40, $50, and you're asking for 60, and they tell you, "I can't afford you," it's interesting that the same guy who says, "I can't afford you," can now, he can buy countries.
But here's the important thing about that story. At the end of the night, when your uncle gave me my envelope, and for every night that I continued to work their TVs, it had that extra money in it. He gave me the raise. He just couldn't tell me that I deserved it. Because then I believe that maybe would have made my head big in his mind. Or like he just wanted to keep you under his control.
Well, Gary, that is a subject of a show Dan and I actually, honestly, just did a week ago. a week ago today, in fact, talking about the control or the perceived control now in 2020 that WWE has over their wrestlers. Or not, they're not, I'm sorry, they're not wrestlers, Dan. They are superstars. Excuse me.
Right. Independent contracting superstar.
Yeah. Superstars used to be something special. Now they're generic, whoever this, give me some names, Dan. I don't even follow this shit anymore. Whoever these people are, everywhere, they're all superstars. Point I'm trying to make is, there aren't any wrestlers anymore. You worked at a time, Gary, when you were with men, professional wrestlers, and women, professional wrestlers, who made a fight look as real as you could do without it being a shoot. And they were incredible performers. You didn't have to call them performers. You didn't have to expose the business the way Vinnie Mac did. It was not necessary. What was wrong with keeping the illusion? Your job as the announcer, and people don't fucking get this, pardon my French, but my French lessons haven't paid off. Your job was singularly to keep these people invested, to put them over to this crowd. And you did it better than anybody for $40.
I think what they didn't understand was, first off, what I think they were uncomfortable was that my main source of income came from elsewhere. And I think that they believed that if they couldn't control your purse strings, that they felt threatened by that. But what they failed to understand was that they controlled me by my heartstrings, which are much, much stronger than my purse strings. And I would have done anything to keep the job. They didn't, and I guess that's just their perception, their way of looking at things. And maybe they've been burned so many times that they became hard to how to deal with people.
Yeah. Dan, you want to take that question of control we had last week and tie it into what Gary's talking about?
Yeah, we touched on it a lot,
and the extra income question.
That's where I was going. We touched on it a lot because the big story that had come out in recent weeks was the WWE had ordered its employees, its wrestlers off all third-party platforms. No Twitch, no YouTube, no social media, nothing. If there was a way to generate income, they had to drop it, and they forced their talent to sign new contracts, either getting rid of it or running it through the company and giving the McMahons a percentage. And the argument became, you're classified as an independent contractor, but now you're being forced to give up other independent contracts. This isn't wrestling for another company. This is you playing video games or watching movies and people paying you to do it. And it was kind of an interesting narrative because it goes to what you talked about with the heartstrings and the purse strings. Was there are people who straight up came out, I'll give it up in a heartbeat because wrestling means more to me than that. Whereas some, Selena Vega was the one we mentioned, who was terminated from her contract because she told him to pound sand, that the money was more important to her than the company. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts, because I know you're still very much involved in the local narrative of that mentality of the independent contractor being just shoehorned into, to the point where, okay, now you're not only exclusive to my company, but you can't make money anywhere else, even on your own.
Well, the short answer is that the company has to make up its mind. Are you an employee or are you an independent contractor?
And that's the question.
And you have to be consistent with how you treat the people that are working for you. Not many people know that in the late 80s, I sued WWF at the time.
Yep.
Because I was one of the, if maybe the only guy back who was highlighted on their Coliseum videotapes.
Yeah.
Who did not sign off on anything. And I sued them for that. I stood up to them for that. That didn't make me a favored person either. But, you know, there are certain things that are right and certain things that aren't. I go into, in my book, Bodyslams, I go into depth as to why anyone that works full-time with WWE is not an independent contractor. Just is not. And how they've been able to slip through the courts, because I know they've been challenged in the past. I truly don't understand it. Perhaps with Andrew Yang's attention, maybe finally
same conversation.
You know, they'll be taken. I don't know. It's amazing that they've gotten away. I would love not only for them.
To God, we have honestly. You are having the conversation with Dan and I that we had literally a week ago today.
Not only would I like for them to be taken to task, but if and when proven wrong, I would like for them to retroactively, over the decades, pay up what they didn't pay for years. And maybe it be put into some kind of a fund for wrestlers who are in need.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about that, and we talked about the one guy who was most successful doing that, being Jesse Ventura, because Jesse Ventura came to the WWF as Jesse Ventura. They didn't own his name or likeness. They hired him as a wrestler. And when they marketed, the best of, or the volume 1 or whatever of this particular Jesse Ventura match sets, they went so and not paid Jesse his royalties. Well, he sued them and won, and successfully sued them and won. Not only did he get everything back, but he got everything that was going to be made in the future, because he was Jesse before WWF. And in large part, you said it yourself, Gary, moments ago, they take pride in controlling. They own these characters. They didn't own Hulk Hogan. They didn't own Jesse Ventura. They didn't even really own the Ultimate Warrior, because he was, for all intents and purposes, the Warrior before he got there. And we've had.
I would proffer that the reason that Jesse won, one major factor, was that he used an attorney out from the Midwest, outside of the influence of the Northeastern buddy system of attorneys that screw people over. I mean, McDevitt has a pretty casts a pretty wide net as to who his compatriots are.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. When you deal with McDevil, I guess you buy in. You get what you buy into. This guy, he finds these little loopholes, Gary, and he just drives a bullet train through them. We talked about this last week. Just the simplest. And I said something last week, and you're the guy who might answer this, Gary.
And it's not just that that's what he does, but he also, if he can't find that little bullet hole, he will find a way to blow the whole thing up. And I have to be careful of what I'm saying, because I have no absolute proof. But my case was just blown up.
I can validate it for you. He decimates what he can't control. But that's their MO.
That's right. MO. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. Benny, you want to chime in on this one?
Well, I want to kind of go a little bit off topic, because I heard something today that Gary had said, and I was incredulous.
It's not true, Benny. It's not true.
For 11 years he worked for the WWF, and he said he literally had 3 conversations with Vince McMahon in 11 years. And I'm thinking to myself, like, if I worked in an office for 11 years and, my coworker was 2 cubicles away and I had 3 conversations in 11 years, there's like something terribly wrong there. And you said something before about it was a deliberate attempt to, like, for you not to be close with management. Was that like just the way Vince was, or how did that come about?
I cited one of those conversations earlier. He said to me, "That's not my job. Go talk to my father."
That's 1 out of 3, right?
Yeah, that's 1 out of the 3. So the question, I'm sorry, I got sidelined. Your question again?
Was that just the way he was, or was that something that was like a corporate thing, or?
Well, that's the way Vinny was.
Well, Gary, can I interject something here for a moment? And I'm Benny. I'm sorry for interrupting.
That's right.
But let me ask Benny's question this way, Gary. When did you see a noticeable change in Vince's behavior from this outgoing, gregarious guy to this stuffed shirt, this controlling megalomaniac who had to have everything under the sun in his pocket?
I never saw a change. He was always an a-hole.
That's the answer I was looking for. Yeah. That's the answer I was looking for.
And he was, and I'm talking about at a time when he was in his late 20s, early 30s, working for Daddy. Yep. So he had absolutely no standing. Not that there's any excuse for treating people poorly.
Yeah.
But he had absolutely no standing to consider himself any kind of a success on his own. When I'm talking about he's in his late 20s, early 30s, he was just a jerk.
Yeah. And I've heard that going back to his college days, quite frankly.
Which is fine. I don't need to be close to my boss.
Yeah.
But, and to tell you the truth, Angelo, if, as Howard Finkel was offered a full-time position as the first employee of WWE, back then in the mid-'80s, if I had been offered that, I probably would have turned it down. So, because I had a secure job. And at the time, who could have guessed that WWF would have turned into what it has turned into? So I would have kept my benefits. Especially since they didn't like me, Like, why would I risk everything?
Regarding what it's turned into, it's turned into a shit show is what it's turned into. It's beyond a cluster right now. It's certainly not wrestling. It doesn't, I don't recognize it. It doesn't have any recognizable features of professional wrestling that you grew up working in, that I grew up watching, that Benny grew up watching. It has no recognizable. There's no signature. I can't tell you if this is wrestling. There's nothing there that even looks like what I grew up watching. So
yeah, I want to go on the record as you're saying that. I'm not saying that.
Oh, I'm saying that, and I will say it for the record. I've said it for the record many times. It's not wrestling. So don't call yourself World Wrestling Entertainment. Vince McMahon, and I'll say this for the record, and I've said it for the record. He doesn't like wrestling. He's embarrassed by wrestling. He's embarrassed by what his father did for a living. He's not a promoter. He's a producer. He's not a wrestling promoter. He's a television producer. He's embarrassed to be a third-generation wrestling promoter. There, I said it. How many times is that, Dan, that I've said that? 8, 9, 13?
Shitload.
I just didn't want my silence to be misinterpreted as total agreement. I agree with some of what you're saying, but not all.
Okay. Fair enough. You mentioned a guy's name earlier in the show. In the interest of full disclosure, my wife knows that man's daughter, Val Morella, Gorilla Monsoon's daughter. And I know you know Val. We're hoping to get her on the show to do a phone-in with us. She's indicated she would, and now I got to tie her down to a date. Talk to me about this, the man that we in this area called the Gentle Giant, the Willingboro Giant. This man, Robert Morella, a.k.a. Gorilla Monsoon.
What a wonderful man. If it was not for him, I would have had absolutely no opportunity to become involved in my lifelong love of my involvement of pro wrestling.
Yeah.
And he was one of the very few, well, he was the only one in management, but he was one of the only few people that were established that treated me like a person, like an individual. He cared about me. He looked out for me. He gave me opportunities. It was because of him that I started working on television, even against my protests. When he called me and asked, I said, I can't do that. He said, well, why not? I said, I've never done that before. I have no. This was after working with him for 2 years.
Yeah.
So I was 23. And Angelo, you can. I have a question.
Sure.
Buddy Wagner. I mean, I came in and worked when Buddy Wagner stopped working. Buddy Wagner stopped working because I never knew the answer to that question.
Because he got sick. He was very ill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Buddy had a very distinctive voice.
Sure.
There was a reason he had a very distinctive voice. He had cancer of the larynx, but he became known for that raspy, that gritty voice. And you remember what he sounded like.
Yes.
Buddy was also, and I'm not, rest his soul, I'm not speaking out of turn here. Buddy was also one hell of a drinker. He was a world champion drinker. Because he, when the boys went to the bar, and Buddy was with him. And in fact, Buddy often drove. He was just a very gregarious guy, a very nice guy, warm guy. But he had some issues, health issues, and he liked to, pulled back on the elbow a little bit once in a while.
Okay, so I never knew why why the switch happened. It was just that Monsoon asked me if I wanted to do it, and I didn't.
Been somewhere, Gary, about 74-ish, 75, somewhere around there.
76. It was 4th of July weekend, 76.
Yeah, because I remember that Buddy, by 75, he was pretty well out, and you saw a lot of Joe McHugh at the time. You saw there was another guy, a heavyset gentleman with a bald head. Oh God, what was his name? Shoot.
It was Friendly Bob Freed.
Thank you very much. That was the other guy. Yeah, and other than he and Joe McHugh and yourself, kind of Buddy was really kind of out of it by 75-ish for all intents and purposes. And he certainly had no real voice left. The last time I saw Buddy was in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, at the then, and you'll know the place when I tell you, Gary, at the then Cherry Hill Arena, the home of the at that time farm club called the New Jersey Devils, that are now a full-fledged NHL hockey team. That was their venue.
Is that the place under the water tower that says Cherry Hill?
Yes, sir. Yeah, you remember it. Yeah.
You know what saddens me is the list, and I mean it could be a multi-page list of the venues that I played that no longer exist.
We talked about that, Gary, and
the Arlo Theater in Camden. You know where I went a few years ago, which still does exist and is doing very well, and that is Cowtown. Cowtown Rodeo Arena.
Yes, I'm 20 minutes from there.
I remember waiting, at Nights of Storms, announcing like an idiot under thunder and lightning, with an electric microphone in the middle of all this slop. It's, but there are so many, like the Capitol Theater in Passaic. There's certain armories that don't exist. I was really annoyed when they changed the name of Atlantic City Convention Hall. Like they called it Boardwalk Hall. Like why did they do that? Like that was a historic place. Yeah. Miss America happened there for years and years and years and years. Why didn't they just name the new place something else?
Well, and that was the $1 million question. That was the $1 million question. And for people who don't know what you're talking about, I'll synopsize it. Atlantic City has two multi-generational buildings. The Atlantic City Convention Hall, by its proper name, is located next to the train station, the transportation station in Atlantic City. The old convention hall, as the old timers like us like to call it, is now called Boardwalk Hall.
Right.
A name that people are not happy with.
No.
For all intents and purposes, it was and shall remain to us as the Atlantic City Convention Center, where Bert Parks sang Here She Is, Miss America for decade after decade. Jim Cornette's favorite building, he calls it, Jim Cornette calls that building a barn. He calls it a barn. He says it looks like a big outhouse, a barn outhouse or something to that effect. He doesn't like the building. What they did, Gary,
he doesn't like New Jersey, so
he hates it. He hates it, and despite the fact that one of his best friends lived here, Dennis Carluzzo, rest in peace. And I knew Dennis. Dennis was a friend of mine. But if you look at that building now, Boardwalk Hall has been completely redone inside. It now has, for all intents and purposes, spectrum-style seating. It's an oval now. They built an oval in the building. And so now it's no longer this big open floor space with individual chairs. It's now a regular, arena seating now.
Back in the WWF, we never really worked the main hall. We worked an exhibition hall, which would seat maybe 2,000 people.
Exactly. You guys also, back in the day, worked a place, and I've often said it on the show, I grew up in this building, the Philadelphia Arena at 45th and Market. That was, for all intents and purposes, just a big old empty warehouse that had seats. They converted a warehouse into an auditorium. That's what they did. And it became one of the most iconic wrestling venues on the Northeast. And held quite a bit of people. I think they 14,000 people in that building.
Angelo, there was only one night when I announced at the arena, it was a Saturday night show, that I didn't want to be there. And maybe you can explain how this happened.
Go ahead.
The reason that I didn't want to be there was, and this was so uncommon for back in the day, is that we knew that the title was going to change in Baltimore that night.
Yes.
How did the word get out? I mean, that was amazing that we knew that. And we knew we had a shit show in Philly, and we couldn't see, the title change.
Well, there were two ways that happened, and because I know people who used to relay and feed the information. Very much the way, and Gary, you're from this area, so when I say to you street numbers, you know what I'm talking about. The bookies.
Okay. Yeah.
They had a vested interest in wrestling because, believe it or not, and you're going to think I'm shitting you, I swear to you I'm not, They used to take illegal street bets on booking wrestling. They would take street bets on wrestling. They had an over and an under. They had a point spread, just like a football game. And there were people who they were runners, and they would get on the phone in Baltimore and call Philly and say, this is happening now. Put it out there. This is happening now. Put it out there. The title's going to change here. Put it out there, and it would change the variation on the point spread, and it could make somebody very wealthy that night, or it could break you.
Right, but in the days leading up to that night, the buzz was there that this was going to happen, and the McMahons and management would never let that information out. And I don't know how it got out. How did the bookies find out?
It got out, Gary, because there were people who had a vested financial interest in it getting out. That's what I'm telling you.
Oh, so in this one case, they financially profited, the management, by leaking to the bookies.
It happened in 3 cases, 2 that I'm very familiar with. It happened in the Bruno Superstar incident. It also happened in the Hulk Hogan Iron Sheik title switch. When they finally got that belt off of Bob and put it on the Sheik, Cosgrove Ajiri, Iron Sheik, that was the ushering in the Hogan era. That there was money there.
When they threw the towel in. When they threw the towel in.
Yeah, and it's all money. It's all money.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's all money. There were ways. We had Dan and I actually. You'll find this interesting, Gary. We've been having a series of shows on the Mafia. This is like going. What's it? Number 5 now, Dan?
Next one will be episode 5. Yep.
On episode 2, Gary, we had an interesting conversation about the Mafia's involvement in boxing and wrestling. The mob had a vested financial interest in professional wrestling. They backed it financially a lot. They also had a vested interest in who would win and who would lose. Dan, tell me if I'm bullshitting.
No, you're right. They often used the various guests we had often told the stories of the mob using local territories to launder money too, because that was a very big cash flow was all the local shows.
Yeah, you can't make this stuff up, brother. I wish you could, but it's always when I say the truth is stranger than fiction. They're not lying. Truth is always stranger than fiction. Benny, you've been quiet for a few minutes. I'm gonna let you have at it. There's some more questions, and we'll say goodnight to Gary very shortly.
All right.
Oh, you know what? Before you get to your question, because we're at that point in the show, why don't we have a word from our sponsor, who, by the way, is prominently displayed behind me here on Gary's.
You'd never ask.
Manscaped.com.
All right. Okay. This isn't a turn because I love George Carlin and he was a great poet. I'm gonna give you a little poem tonight. When your balls are looking gnarly, they need a trim from Chainsaw Charlie. Now's the time to go online to get that package looking fine. Just head on over to manscaped.com and those family jewels, they'll be the bomb. With the patented Lawnmower 3.0, your figs will take win, place, and show. With the Lawnmower 3.0, with the Lawnmower 3.0's pointed a patent.
Oh, Jesus.
No more plums like Kruger Fred. I love your huevos. That's what she said. Use the code Wrestling Future for a generous 20% discount. That's Wrestling Future. Guaranteed to have the lady in your life say, holy moly, that's a good-looking cannoli. The end.
And Angelo, you question the content of my show? Are you fucking kidding me?
Oh, damn.
That was Benny
Our
channeling his
love us.
Channeling his inner Lanny Poffo there.
Wait a minute, Dan. It gets better. Dan, tell my friend Mr. Cappetta who's coming on board.
Starting next year, our other new sponsor is going to be Blue Chew. So we're going to completely corner the market on shave balls and boners. We'll have it all. we know Angelo knows our target audience. So
yes. Well, go ahead, Benny. I'll give you one more question, then I'll segue Gary out of this one. By the way,
right.
before we do that, Gary, can I get a commitment from you to come back in February? I want to share a gentleman I have. His name is Javier Hoist. He's a writer for Pro Wrestling Stories, and I would love to have him on with you.
You know, Angelo, when you get to be my age, you don't make commitments that far out. We'll talk about it, Angelo. I don't know. I don't know where you're going to be, Angelo.
Hey, Ben.
Gary, if you got an offer today from WWE to go back and, you know, work their schedule and do all their travel, would you do it?
Probably not. Anything that WWE they would never offer me anything. But if they were ever to offer me anything, we would not begin to talk unless and until they paid me for what they owed me for what I sued them for.
There you go.
Once we caught up to being even, then we could go forward.
Right.
And by the way, that suit was somehow mysteriously my attorney stopped going to the pretrial hearings, so the case was dismissed.
Interesting.
Because WWE could not. They were wrong, and I had them. So then I sued the attorney. It was a malpractice suit. And in order to win that suit, you have to prove the underlying suit. In other words, in order for me to win against my former attorney, I had to prove that my case against WWE was rock solid. And I won that.
There you go.
So before I would ever go forward with anything new with WWE, they'd have to bring us up to 2020 and pay me what they owe me.
And that's a lot of money. Gary, let's get your social media out there. Let's get your website. Let's plug the book. It's Bodyslams, Wrestling, Memoirs of a Wrestling Pitchman. Also, are you still doing the Beyond Bodyslams, the stage play?
Haven't been able to, over this past year. We are taking bookings for the future from promoters who, I traveled the entire East Coast with it. I went inland to Indianapolis, Louisville, Chicago. I never was able to take the show to the West. So if there are any promoters out there that want to bring us in, I'd love to do that.
Yeah, beautiful. Absolutely. I may have a guy, actually, and Dan, who knows who I'm talking about. I may have a guy in Des Moines, Iowa, who could help you.
Nice.
Dan is smiling. He knows this guy's a heavy hitter too, brother. Good friend of mine. Right? Real good friend of mine, a very heavy hitter. I'll tell you when we get off the air. So it's GaryCappetta.com. You have a website.
I don't have a website, but I do most of my business on Facebook.
Okay.
And that's my initials, GMC, the number 4 real, GMC for real. Beautiful. On Twitter, I'm Gary Cappetta. On Instagram, I'm Gary Cappetta.
Beautiful. Dan, you want to give everybody our information?
course, Wrestling with the Future, our social media profile. We're on Twitter at Wrestling Future. That's no G, Wrestling Future. We're on Facebook, Wrestling with the Future Podcast, a private group. We're on Instagram, Wrestling with the Future Podcast. And as Angelo mentioned at the top of the show, we can be found anywhere you download podcasts, Wrestling with the Future Podcast.
Everywhere. We are on 149 platforms worldwide. 7 commercial radio stations, 3 international television stations, Skynet in Canada, the BBC4 in England, and probably somewhere on a satellite in the Midwest or on a good night in the fillings in your teeth. We're all over the place. Benny, what's going on with Benny Scala? Where can people find you, brother?
Well, after that commercial, probably at the Pasco County Jail in Land O'Lakes. I'll take food offerings. I love cheesecake. Not cheesecake, carrot cake, actually. No, I'm just Benny, Benny, Scala, Scala on Facebook. No Twitter, nothing else.
Affectionately known as Scala from Ocala, Big Ben Scala. On that note, for Big Ben Scala, hashtag Scala from Ocala, for Dan the Man Sebastiano, the happy haberdasher, the smartest guy in the room, and for Gary Michael Cappetta, the world's most dangerous announcer, I'm Angelo DeCiprio. Thanks for joining us as we continue to wrestle with the future. Good night, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Good luck. The end is near and the beginning is upon us. We'll see you very soon. Lord willing, this will be better than I hope this year. Take care, everybody.